Tell me if I need to bring a little bottle.
Yeah, bring some wine or something.
Well, I got some Jameson.
Oh, nice.
I got some Gentleman Jack.
I like that.
I got some Scotch.
Okay, be good.
I got some Glenfiddich.
Okay. All right, let's get this episode started.
All right.
What's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in. Another PS Poets podcast. I'm your co-founder, Chase Yi. This is Sergio Cacciotti.
Yes, that's my last name.
I'm sure you all know who we are by now. But we're super stoked to be filming again. We had to take a couple weeks off. I got sick. I had a really bad tooth infection for a little while. And then Sergio actually just started a new job today as a therapist. Can you believe that?
It's scary, isn't it?
Yeah. This guy is
my first day.
His first day. They gave him a brand new company computer, new phone. He has no idea how to use it.
It's fancy. I don't know how to use any of it.
Johnny Cho, if you're listening and watching, he's going to be miracle you any day now.
Johnny Cho will be listening. Johnny Cho's not listening to this. Johnny Cho's like the miracle. This guy is a miracle. I'd call him the computer whisperer.
This guy, basically, if you have any tech problems, look up Johnny
Lord
Cho or contact
Johnny
us. We'll put you in touch with Johnny so you can ask your questions. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about, for this episode, poetry. Okay, specifically just different forms of poetry. How to go about, I guess, whatever. What do you want to talk about? Just writing poetry, or
so let's talk about like even how we thought about even talking about poetry besides being a poetry, group and a creative writing group. So as Chase actually mentioned, it's good that you mentioned it. I just started a new job today. I have a job as a clinician. And I've been reading some books on trauma recovery, and there's a very good book called "The Body Keeps the Score," Vanderkult. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I believe that's how you pronounce it. But anyway, he is an expert on trauma. And kind of working with people with dealing with any kind of trauma from any kind of past experiences. And he talks about creative writing, actually. He talks about in this book, besides the neuroscience and everything else, like the technical, clinical side of it, he spends a whole chapter on creative writing and how powerful, actually, creative writing and the power in telling one's story,
right,
to kind of confront feelings or things in our past that may be uncomfortable or scary. And creative writing can be a very safe way for people to explore things that may scare them. So when I was reading that book, I thought, even though, and I think I had mentioned this to you, even though I enjoy writing poetry, and I've been writing poetry for many years, and I love writing poetry, I don't really know I wouldn't say that I know the craft of poetry as well as you can explain it and you talk about it.
Thank you.
I mean, but as I mentioned, like if someone were to ask me certain elements about poetry, I may not be able to answer those. So I just thought, well, like the iambic pentameter.
Nice.
Right? If somebody were to ask me, hey, if I were to teach a workshop, if I wanted to work with clients and use what we do in creative writing in my therapeutic work,
right,
and I was doing a workshop on creative writing or poetry, and someone were to ask me that question, I wouldn't necessarily know how to exactly answer that.
Sure.
So I think maybe people out here that maybe they're writing poetry and they enjoy writing poetry, and they may think to themselves, hey, I don't really know what that is either.
Right. Well, I guess, it depends on really what you want to learn. I mean, poetry, and I think a lot of people like writing poems because they're easy to some degree, easy in the sense that there's really no rules.
Right.
You can write
unless
free
you
verse poem. Yeah. Well, unless you wanted to follow like an actual strict template. Now, this is a book that Sergio and I have both read. We both own a copy of this book, and I would say that when I started writing poetry, I don't know, when I was like 18, 19, 20, when I really started to get invested in it and wanted to study it more, I stumbled across this book at Barnes & Noble. It's called The Making of a Poem, okay, the Norton Anthology of Poetic Forms. Okay, it's a really great book. It's got all the poetic forms you could learn about,
yeah,
broken down into like really digestible sections
and it's
with examples.
easy to
Yeah, and it's easy to comprehend. So if you wanted to write a sonnet or learn how to write a sonnet, or if you wanted to know what a quatrain is, or if you wanted to write a pastoral, these are all different forms of poetry. This book gives you really great examples to be able to do that, like villanelles, sestinas.
those are not easy.
They're not easy. They're complicated classical forms of poetry, that have
right.
been handed down generations and stuff. So in that sense, yes, if you want to learn how to write poems like that, like Dylan Thomas is a great example. The poem "Rage Against the Dying of the Light," that's a famous villanelle. So if you read that poem, there's certain repetitions in it. It's a 19-line poem, with a certain rhyme scheme of I don't know if it's like A B A C, and then it
I
goes
don't
down.
understand that. I can't. It's almost like when you play chess,
Yeah.
you know how to move the pieces, but you don't know the pawn
You're
to.
right. You
I
have to
don't
think
know that.
long term. You have to think.
I don't
So,
know.
like, okay, so a good example is a sonnet, right? Everyone kind of has an idea of what a sonnet is. Shakespearean sonnet, which is the most popular form of a sonnet. There's a Petrarchan sonnet also, which is an old Italian form, which is different. Which this book also explains what that is. But that one actually predates the Shakespearean sonnet. But a Shakespearean sonnet's a 14-line poem, right? And so we're going back to that rhyme scheme of A B C D C D E F G G.
What does that mean?
So all that means is that lines A and B are going to end with different words. So A and B, that's what they represent, right? And then the third and fourth line, those ending words should rhyme with the first two pair. See what I'm saying? So lines 1 and 3, A should rhyme. And then 2 and 4, B should rhyme.
Oh,
That's what that means. So A B, that means A and A should rhyme, and B should rhyme.
Got you.
And then moving down all the way to the subsequent letters, those should all rhyme. So therefore C D, those should rhyme. So lines 5 and 7 and 6 and 8 should rhyme.
And in this book,
book explains that. Yeah,
right.
It breaks down that sort of poetic structure. And also with sonnets traditionally. So if you want to talk about iambic pentameter, that just represents an underlying meter of rhythm.
Yes.
With each line of the poem. So that but up. Usually it falls within 10 syllables a line.
Oh.
So if you're writing a line and you can make it a 10-syllable line, so like, I ran to the store to buy some, frozen, and then go to the next foods, whatever. If you can keep it 10 syllables a line, you're usually going to fall into that iambic pentameter realm. Yeah.
Okay,
and if you read a lot of Shakespeare's sonnets, like if you get his books and read, if you count the syllables in each line, they usually fall around 9, 10, or 11 syllables per line. And sometimes they're spot on. It's all 10 syllables down. So that's kind of where the mathematics and the expertise of like writing classical poems, falls into that realm. But it's so different. I mean, like I said, I used to follow those rules a lot because I love classical poetry. Robert W. Service is one of my favorite poets. You bought me a couple books actually by him, anthologies, and he writes ballads. So ballads are all like 4-line stanzas. So quatrains, basically. Quatrain is just a 4-line chunk of poems. If it's broken up into 4 sections, that's a quatrain. And ballads always have a B rhyme scheme. That's it. Every single quatrain is A B, and it'll just follow that pattern all the way through. And usually,
is there a limit to that?
Well, yeah. So let's say if you have, it's actually pretty interesting. So like he has a form of his Robert W. Service has a form of his poetry where it's It's a 6-line stanza. A stanza is any length of poetic lines in like a chunk. So 4 lines would be a quatrain, but a stanza could be any length, just as long as it's like a block of poetry, right? So let's say it's a 6-line stanza, right? So metrically and numerically, if you're going to have 6 lines in a stanza, that means you should have 6 stanzas.
Right. That's right. That much I knew at least.
So that's kind of
Right.
an interesting concept. So it doesn't make, if you have like
What
6.
about with quatrains? If it's 4,
Yeah. You could do
Ship-
4 quatrains. That's like a quick ballad.
Right.
But then really a ballad could be super long, because that's folklore. And that's when you're kind of getting into like telling stories within poems, not just like trying to communicate some kind of universal message in a subjective sort of way. You know what I mean?
right.
If you're going to use a ballad to like explain, usually you use ballads to tell stories. That's what they are. They're musical folklore stories that are, turned into poems
Right.
to make them more engaging and, easy to remember, like nursery rhymes. You know what I mean? Nursery rhymes are long. Mother Goose or whatever, those are long ballads, basically.
Right.
Dr. Seuss's books are basically long ballads with just kind of, haphazard rhyme schemes, different things. So it's really interesting how you can play around with a lot of the forms, like heroic couplets. Heroic couplets are
So 2.
epic poems. Epic meaning they're super long, traditionally long poems. And yeah, the rhyme schemes AA, BB, CC, DD, EE, FF. You know what I mean? Every pair
has
rhymes.
to rhyme.
But the
end
poem,
words, the last words of the
the end words
end
have to
word,
rhyme.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the end words of the poem rhymes. But that's usually meant for a long poem.
So you know what though, if you think about this though, and I've thought about this, as if you just were wanting to write and become a better writer and kind of just elevate your skills as a writer, that's an interesting thing to kind of have to follow. Force yourself to actually write in that style and have to follow that, because it does a couple of things. One, it takes you out of your element as far as your writing style.
Yes.
So it takes you out of that so you can, do that.
Mm-hmm.
But also it gets you thinking, I think, in a different way about writing.
I think so. Yeah. Well, it gives you, like you said, it does, because like I said, anybody can bust out a notebook and just start journaling.
Right.
I think there's
right.
There's a huge difference between journaling and writing poetry.
Right.
Poetry, I think you have an actual message that you're trying to convey in a very stylistic, literary, metaphorical way. You know what I mean?
Worked on.
It's worked on. It's developed. It's not just like, yes, you can have stream of conscious poems and things that you write down, but very rarely are they going to be like coherent in a sense that like it's actually going to provide value to somebody.
Well, that's a point, because how many times, and you and I have talked about this at poetry readings.
Yeah.
And we hate this.
I
we
know.
See people who are sitting there and they just write something on
on the fucking
and
napkin.
They feel it's brilliant,
and
they got to get up and read it. And is it ever good?
No, it's never good. And I don't know why people feel compelled to say that. Like, listen, if you're gonna come to a reading and do something, you don't have to announce to the world that you just wrote this 5 minutes ago. No one's really gonna know. I mean, so even if it was good, like, you could still save yourself the face of like, that maybe you take your writing seriously.
But it's also kind of like, yeah, I just wrote this. So, in case it, I just, or sometimes like
my genius is so impressive.
Exactly.
I just wrote it.
I just jotted this.
But you know what that also does though? By announcing that you just wrote it, it also diminishes your talent as a writer, because it automatically tells people that, okay, forgive me if this poem sucks.
Right, that's exactly,
because I just wrote
poem
this.
Sucks, yeah.
It's not. So it works against you.
Yeah.
People might think it's a way to like show off your writing, but no. In fact, it's actually hurting your standing. The mystique of like your writing.
It's also just kind of. I mean, besides
it's just a little pompous. It's like, come on,
I mean,
man.
besides arrogant, it's just yeah.
I don't get it. I don't get it. For me, especially for us, writing's a craft. Sergio's a playwright. We've I write every day for work. like we work on writing, so we kind of understand what goes into the grind of like, working on a piece, making it good. And again, I just said this, providing value for somebody who reads it. That's kind of why you write poems. People read poetry for enlightenment. They read poems to feel like they're not alone in the world, you know? And if you just kind of have the mindset like anything you write is gold, like you're not doing anybody a service.
Right.
You're just hurt. You're proliferating shitty writing that's already out there on Instagram and everywhere else in the world.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So anyway, back to what we're saying. Yes, as a healing, concept, I definitely think creative writing has that ability. And if you can explore your feelings, and like Sergio said, embed them into more complicated ways of writing, classical ways of writing, ways that actually make you think about what you're saying. And that's kind of the beauty about classical poems and like traditional poems. You can't just write anything because things have to make sense. Pieces have to align. They have
Right.
to fall in place with syllables, with ending words, with meter underneath. You only have so many lines to do it in. So it challenges
It
you to
teaches
be
you
to
about
be very
formula.
tactile with your work,
It teaches you about
It
formula too.
does.
It's like the most basic kind of lesson in formula.
Right.
Because if you think about it, anything, I mean, I don't know about a novel, I mean, and I've mentioned this in other in there's no rules as far as like something should be something,
Right.
but for the most part, if you write a screenplay, you write a play, there is a formula, and you should learn that formula.
Right.
And I think some of the things that you're talking about teaches you the basics about a formula.
Right.
You know.
I do. Yeah, I agree. And I think that, and listen, I don't want to say that, this mode of writing is better for you or whatever, because I've read some incredible free verse poems by
Yeah.
writers I love. Cummings is a huge example. I love his work, and he plays with both. He has structure, he has rhyme scheme, but then he also breaks those molds altogether and comes up with totally new concepts of free verse poetry. I think Billy Collins is another great example of a modern poet who understands where poetry came from, and then by knowing those forms, you can then mold them and turn them into your own. You can break the rules essentially by learning the rules so well, rather than you just not knowing anything about poetry and just
You
kind
have
of
to learn your
writing every
craft.
day. Yeah, you have to learn your craft. You have to
Yeah.
read, and that's the other thing. You have to really read poems, and
Right.
and you'd be surprised at like what poets were writing about hundreds of years ago, 2, 3, 400 years ago. It's like incredible. That's like Anne Bradstreet is a great example. Pre-Revolutionary War poetry. Slave poetry is incredible. What these people were writing about in this, across the world. Emily Dickinson is a master at stanzas. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Rhyme schemes, move in such succinct, you know, chunks of poetry. She's a master at it. And then if you want to go into like free verse poetry, Sylvia Plath, she's incredible how she moved away in sort of this modern era of poetry in the 50s and 60s and totally like she just broke the mold with what free verse poetry is today. But you have to understand that these people had predecessors. They came from different, it's a long lineage of poets that get you to where we are today. And unfortunately, I think, with the advent of social media and Instagram and the way people can just toss ideas out there, and even our Instagram account on PS Poets, falls prey to that occasionally because we have quotes that people share. But again, those things are shareable. People just like that kind of content because
Right.
it is inspirational. I get it. There's merit to one liner, observations and statements. I understand that. I can't negate the power of that. But if you really want to categorize it as poetry, it does not fall into that category.
Right.
It falls into inspirational quotes.
I
That's
I
that's
I
what it
agree
is.
with that. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So it's complicated, but no, definitely check out this book, The Making of a Poet. It was the one book I studied every single night when I decided that poetry was going to be a part of my life. It just really it allowed me to then, start researching other poets that I was reading about in this book, familiarizing yourself with other forms, and then, actually sitting down to practice writing a villanelle or a pastoral or
Right.
whatever. Um and when you start to take the time to like learn and invest yourself into those things, that's where the real craft comes alive. I think, that's when you kind of start challenging yourself to become a better writer. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's important. I think it's really good. Yeah. I mean, what else do you want to chat about?
I don't know. I think that's pretty
That's
good.
it's a lot to chew on,
I
I
mean,
guess. For people
I
to.
think you spoke about a lot of elements of poetry
Yeah, that's
that
true. That's true. I wonder if there's anything in here that I feel like, it'd be interesting if. I mean, there's nothing really I could. You'd have to read this book for yourself. I mean, there's tons of different examples of verse forms of, and they even talk about free verse forms in the book too, which I can understand why that's an important medium for a lot of people to write in, because there is no structure. There's and this is something we talk about too, is the pressure of writing.
yeah.
I think a lot of people do feel like, you want to write, you want to be a writer, you want to write poetry, and you want to do that every day, but you put so much pressure on yourself to say, like, if I'm going to sit down and write something, it needs to be just brilliant right now.
Mm.
Whereas I think we both do. We come from a different school of thought where it's like, listen, writing is here. You should use time to your advantage. Write a line a day, write a few lines a day.
Just right.
Just write every day. Just make it a habit, and don't put that pressure on yourself to decide that it has to be gold, right away, because it doesn't have
No,
to
I
be.
think you're setting yourself up for
Exactly. I
disappointment
think so
there,
too.
you know.
You have all the time in the world to work on something. And that's the whole point of writing. You can write a first draft, wait a week, read it again, see what you like about it, see what you don't, and change things. See if it makes sense. Or if it's, fresh in your mind again when you read it, if it has that same impact on you that it did when you initially started to write it. I think those are important things to think about. And even, what about you? Like, when you write your poems, I mean, like, what's sort of your process of?
Gosh,
Because I know you say that it takes you time
yeah,
to.
it takes me time. When you talk about like meter and rhythm, I write basic, with plays and poetry,
Mhm,
I write strictly off of in my head rhythm. It's
right.
like beats. And so the words go off like of a rhythm of a beat. And that's how I could find the words. But it's basically, for me, the way I describe it is like it's almost like music. I mean, I don't really play guitar or piano. I don't play really music, but writing to me is like writing music,
Mm,
kind of, and that's kind of the way. So when I'm writing something, the note has to sound right for me to continue. Otherwise, I can't continue. It would
right.
be like playing, if you're playing the piano and you're writing something and it's great, it's going, and all of a sudden you can't find that next note, and
Hmm.
it's just not. And so I'll I kind of get very in my head a lot. I'll go over that a lot of times until I find something, and then I neurotically go back and reread and reread. And
Well,
I
that's
think
good. I
that's
think
one of the
that's.
reasons why I think it takes me a long time to uh, even just to write sometimes a poem. I'm not like a now if I'm doing a stream of conscious, or I'm doing, just something like that, that's different.
Yeah,
But typically I'm a bit I don't want to say, I very much take my time
that's good.
and I rewrite a lot.
Well, I have to say that last poem you sent me was really good.
Oh, did you
I,
like
I
that?
loved it. I actually thought it was a lot different than things you've written in the
Yeah.
past. And I've noticed. I don't know if anybody is. Well, I hope that you do. You should check out PSPOETS.com. Sergio's been contributing a lot of really great, thought-provoking blog posts just about things that are happening in the world right now.
If you're
And
interested about writing, check out the one on the writing.
yeah,
There's a
his
lot of
creative
it's the
writing
creative
blog post is really good.
intro to creative writing.
That's right. And I think that his blog writing, these opinion pieces that he's sort of putting together, I think is also it's bleeding into your poetry too, because I've noticed that it has you have more of a I don't want to say like a activist like element, but I definitely see you writing more about, like, these larger, like I said, universal issues, but in a very kind of subjective way that's personal,
Yeah.
and I think that that's what really good poetry does.
Yeah. I really have enjoyed writing the blog. I didn't even know really how to write a blog,
Yeah.
but I've really been enjoying it. And, I've just been really, really like it. And I put a lot of time into
I
those
know you do.
blogs.
Yeah.
I really do. I put a lot of time and I do a lot of research on those blogs. I don't just phone those blogs
Right.
are not being phoned in.
Right.
I mean, I spend quite a bit of time. I really make sure that what I'm writing is, uh, not just like easy to read and just enjoyable to read, but is also informative. And, and, you had just touched on something that, really writing writing is about, you know, of course, storytelling, but connection. And
Yes.
you spoke about it is people want to feel connected, people want to be touched, and they want to feel that human connection. And I think, you know, this last blog that I just wrote, I did a lot of research on George Orwell, and George Orwell is one of my favorite. He's just I love his writing, and I love him as a storyteller. Um, but his whole premise in writing was to provoke thought.
Yeah.
He wasn't writing in the sense of his first priority was not necessarily to entertain, but was to provoke thought and really social to possibly create social change and to talk about what is going on in society. I mean, you could look at many periods throughout time through in history, and there's always something happening. And when George Orwell was alive and when he was writing those novels, that first half of the 20th century, that was a tumultuous time.
Yeah.
And with the world wars and the depression and just the all the things that were going on in Europe with fascism and everything. He spoke about that, and he spoke about writing to create change. And that particular poem, I'm glad that we never even talked about that, but
No,
I'm
not
glad
yet.
you.
No,
But I was inspired about a book, and I don't know if we talked about the book on the podcast, but I read a book called Empire of the Summer Moon.
Oh yeah. You told me about that.
And it was just about the Plains and the Cherokees and
Right.
uh, their story. But that book had a really profound. And the guy who wrote it, I'm not gonna. Let me try not to remember his name because I don't want to get it wrong at this moment. I don't have the book in front of me.
That's fine.
But he wrote it in such a beautiful, like a really well written
poetic
way.
yeah.
It really it took a story that was already a great story and just enhanced it.
Wow.
And when you can write like that, even a nonfiction book, you can touch somebody.
That's right.
The story could touch somebody.
Yeah.
If you write it, if you're a good writer and you practice your craft and you hone your craft and you're passionate, but that poem I worked a lot on that. I spent actually going back to spending time on poem. I spent a lot of time on that poem.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's important. I think you have to you should, definitely take time with your work because your words are powerful. If you're going to share your work with other people, you'd be surprised at how much of an impact you can actually make.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're getting down to the last few seconds of our podcast here, but we just want to say thank you to everybody so much for listening. Check us out at PS Poets on Instagram, pspoets.com if you want to learn more about just what we're doing, get involved. Our Earth ebook's going to be coming out soon, hopefully within the next week. I've been working on that right now. So definitely stay tuned for that. And just thank you all so much for.
Got another blog. I had another blog come out. Did you
Yep,
post
another
that?
blog post. I just posted it. So visit pspoets.com. Check that out. You can read Sergio's work. Every week he's putting stuff together. So we'll be back just with more content. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.